All right, we're good. Sorry, guys, that took me so long. I was like gonna jump off, go use the bathroom, come back, and then my partner was like, "Babe, can you like put the chicken in the pressure cooker?" Because I'm the magician, I guess, with the pressure cooker. So I was like, so I had to go like find chicken in the deep freezer and then like, you know, not defrost it, but like loosen up the plastic around it so that I can like pop it into the pressure cooker. So that's pretty much what happened and why it took me so long. So my apologies, guys. So, all right. So we are reading, we are doing the Conversations with God books. And so this series is one of my absolute favorites because it, in my opinion, is like the gold standard of spiritual wisdom. And not only that, but a lot of people believe in God and believe in, you know, our connection to source, our connection to each other, but they're not religious, right? A lot of people are like that. And I think this does a really good job at bringing forward that connection and that relationship with God so that it doesn't technically have to be like a religious experience. And this is something that I personally, myself, had to work through because... Get this music. Okay, I have to have some music going on. If you hear some like wailing music, that's my tunnel singer. It's one of my favorite CDs ever in my entire life. I've used it like during all of my spiritual work. It's called the Tunnel Singer. So, and it's pretty cool. Lady who she goes to tunnels and she sings. In normal circumstances, her voice isn't that incredible. When she goes into a tunnel, it's like the most amazing, like siren sounding voice. So I always use it for my spiritual work because it helps me to feel like I'm in the depths of my own soul. Anyways, back to what I was saying. So when I was beginning to work on my own spirituality and I was trying to establish a relationship with God, I was coming from a Catholic background. I mean, I was raised as a Catholic and that's what I was conditioned to be and to think as. When I realized that I was gay and I made amends with myself about my own sexuality, that essentially like shot me in another direction in my life. And I didn't stick to just being a good old Catholic boy. I decided I wanted to understand our connection to God in a much more intimate and like very personal way. And when I began to seek and you shall find, knocking and it shall be open to you, a lot of things were open to me. And I found God not only in a lot of material and books, etc., but I also found God in myself. Now, whenever you say the word God, some people immediately want to steer away because they don't have that sense of they don't have a desire to want to even associate with the idea of God because either they are, you know, they don't believe in the standard Christian view of God, or for them religion just holds a lot of like, you know, bad vibes and like bad experiences. I remember having a conversation with one of my exes a few months back. I think it was last year sometime. And he was just like, you know, how are you doing? You know, all this other stuff. We were having this conversation. And I was like, you know, you could probably use this because this would help you to make sense of stuff. And he was starting to go into more of a spiritual mindset. And I said, you know, you should read this book. It's called Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And he was like, oh, no, I don't do anything that's like religious, you know? And I was like, it's not a religious book. It's a spiritual book. This is not a religious doctrine. This is a spiritual conversation that this man, the author, is having with Source or with the Maker, right? And now as I've, you know, progressed in my own spiritual development and I've evolved in my own awareness of things, this to me is like, it still holds just as much value and worth, even more so, because what it shows is that we all can have this one-on-one with Source and with the divine. And that's what I always wanted for myself, because I wanted the answers that would help me to make sense of the craziness that life is. So for me, this was a starting point. Now, I'm not saying that everything that is in this book is 100% everything that it, you know, but it was a starting point for me, and it helped me to be able to move forward and to have a much more profound experience of Source and of our connection to each other and to the world, and then why we're really here. So So we're going to go through a few of the passages. I'm going to try to get through the first chapter. I don't think I'm going to, but I'm going to try to get through the first chapter. But I'm going to stop if I want to talk about something, because there's a lot of really great nuggets and tidbits here, and I'm not going to just like pass that up if I have an opportunity to stop and explain it or give you some more depth and understanding. And by the way, guys, if y'all are like tuning in, if y'all are tuning in for a reading, that was last hour, so I'm not doing readings anymore. Now I'm doing the study group, so you'll have to come back next Wednesday for the time that's selected for that. Okay, if you guys are listening in and you want to be a part of the conversation with God, you can post your questions there, or if you have a comment you want to add, or something that you would like to address about the material and the stuff that we're talking about, I'm open to that, and I welcome those kinds of conversations. Okay. All right, guys. So let's go here. And by the way, guys, if any of you want to come on live, you're welcome to do that as well, as far as like talking about the material and what we're going to get into. All right. So Conversations with God, Neil Donald Walsh. In the spring of 1992, it was around Easter, as I recall, an extraordinary phenomenon occurred in my life. God began talking with you through me. Let me explain. I was very unhappy during that period, personally, professionally, and emotionally, and my life was feeling like a failure on all levels. As I'd been in the habit for years of writing my thoughts down in letters, which I usually never delivered, I picked up my trusty yellow legal pad and began pouring out my feelings. This time, rather than another letter to another person I imagined to be victimizing me, I thought I'd go straight to the source, straight to the greatest victimizer of them all. I decided to write a letter to God. It was a spiteful, passionate letter full of confusions, contortions, and condemnations, and a pile of angry questions. Why wasn't my life working? What would it take to get it to work? Why could I not find happiness in relationships? Was the experience of adequate money going to elude me forever? Finally, the most emphatically, what had I done to deserve a life of such continuing struggle? To my surprise, as I scribbled out the last of my bitter, unanswerable questions and prepared to toss my pen aside, my hand remained poised over the paper, as if held there by some invisible force. Abruptly, the pen began moving on its own. I had no idea what I was about to write, but an idea seemed to be coming, so I decided to flow with it. Out came, do you really want an answer to all these questions, or are you just venting? I blinked, and then my mind came up with a reply. I wrote that down, too. Both I'm venting, sure, but if these questions have answers, I'd sure as hell like to hear them. You are sure as hell about a lot of things, but wouldn't it be nicer to be sure as heaven? And I wrote, what is that supposed to mean? Before I knew it, I had begun a conversation, and I was not writing so much as taking dictation. That dictation went on for 3 years, and at the time I had no idea where it was going. The answers to the questions I was putting on paper never came to me until the question was completely written down and I'd put my own thoughts away. Often the answers came faster than I could write, and I found myself scribbling to keep up. When I became confused or lost the feeling that the words were coming from somewhere else, I put the pen down and walked down from the dialogue until I again felt inspired. Sorry, that's the only word which truly fits. To return to the yellow legal pad and start transcribing again. These conversations are still going on as I write this, and much of it is found on the pages which follow. Pages which contain an astounding dialogue which at first I disbelieved, then assumed to be of personal value, but which I now understand was meant for more than just me. It was meant for you and everyone else who has come to this material. For my questions are your questions. I want you to get into this dialogue as soon as you can, because what's really important here is not my story, but yours. It is your life story which brought you here. It is your personal experience to which this material has relevance. Otherwise, you would not be here with it right now. So let's enter the dialogue with a question I had been asking for a very long time. How does God talk, and to whom? When I asked this question, here's the answer I received. I talk to everyone, all the time. The question is not to whom do I talk, but who listens. Intrigued, I asked God to expand on this subject. Here's what God said. First, let's exchange the word talk with the word communicate. It's a much better word, a much fuller, more accurate one. When we try to speak to each other, me to you, you to me, we are immediately constricted by the unbelievable limitation of words. For this reason, I do not communicate by words alone. In fact, rarely do I do so. My most common form of communication is through feeling. Feeling is the language of the soul. If you want to know what's true for you about something, look to how you're feeling about it. Feelings are sometimes difficult to discover and often even more difficult to acknowledge. Yet hidden in your deepest feelings is your highest truth. The trick is to get to those feelings. I will show you how, again, if you wish. I told God that I did wish, but that right now I wished even more for a complete and full answer to my first question. Here's what God said. I also communicate with thought. Thoughts and feelings are not the same. Although they can occur at the same time, in communicating with thought, I often use images and pictures. For this reason, thoughts are more effective than mere words as tools of communication. In addition to feelings and thoughts, I also use the vehicle of experience as a grand communicator. And finally, when feelings and thoughts and experience all fail, I use words. Words are really the last effective communicator. They are the most open to misinterpretation, most open to misunderstood. And why is that? It is because of what words are. Words are merely utterances, noises that stand for feelings, thoughts, and experience. They are symbols, signs, insignias. They are not truth. They are not the real thing. Words may help you understand something. Experience allows you to know. Yet there are some things you cannot experience. So I have given you other tools of knowing, and these are called feelings, and so too thoughts. Now, the supreme irony here is that you have all placed so much importance on the Word of God and so little on the experience. In fact, you place so little value on experience that what you experience of God differs, that when what you experience of God differs from what you've heard of God, you automatically discard the experience and own the words, when it should be just the other way around. Your experience and your feelings about a thing represent what you factually and intuitively know about that thing. Words can only seek to symbolize what you know and can often confuse what you know. These, then, are the tools which I communicate, yet they are not the methods, for not all feelings, not all thoughts, not all experience, and not all words are from me. Many words have been uttered by others in my name. Many thoughts and many feelings have been sponsored by causes not of my direct creation. Many experiences result from these. The challenge is one of discernment. The difficulty is knowing the difference between messages from God and data from other sources. Discrimination is a similar matter with the application of a basic rule. Mine is always your highest thought, your clearest word, your grandest feeling. Anything less is from another source. Now the task of differentiation becomes easy, for it should not be difficult even for the beginning student to identify the highest, the clearest, and the grandest. Yet will I give you these guidelines. The highest thought is always that thought which contains joy. The clearest words are those words which contain truth. The grandest feeling is that feeling which you call love. Joy, truth, love. These three are interchangeable, and one always leads to the other. It matters not in which order they are placed. Having with these guidelines determined which messages are mine and which have come from another source, the only question remaining is whether my messages will be heeded. Most of my messages are not. Some because they seem too good to be true, others because they seem too difficult to follow, many because they are simply misunderstood, most because they are not received. My most powerful messenger is experience, and even this you ignore. Especially this you ignore. Your world would not be in its present condition were you to have simply listened to your experience. The result of your not listening to your experience is that you keep reliving it over and over again. For my purpose will not be thwarted, nor my will be ignored. You will get the message sooner or later. I will not force you to, however. I will never coerce you. For I have given you a free will, the power to do as you choose, and I will never take that away from you, ever. And so I will continue sending you the same messages over and over again throughout the millennia and to whatever corner of the universe you occupy. Endlessly will I send you my messages until you have received them and held them close, calling them your own. My messages will come in 100 forms at 1,000 moments across 1,000,000 years. You cannot miss them if you truly listen. You cannot ignore them once truly heard. Thus will our communication begin in earnest. For in the past, you have only talked to me, praying to me, interceding with me, beseeching me. Yet now can I talk back to you, even as I am doing here. So I'm going to stop right there because that's a lot to digest. So I will say that this in itself here is very, very important because this is how I began to realize that I communicate with Source, that I hear messages from Source all the time. Not only that, but this is another reason why I truly believe that we are all communicating and we are all receiving messages from Source on a regular basis. For me, the first time I truly heard Source, truly heard God clearly, was when I realized that I was gay. Now, there are a lot of people who may say, oh my God, how can you say that? How can you disparage God and say that God talked to you because you're a sinner, you're a gay, you're homosexual? That doesn't matter in the eyes of God because all things are God's creation. Doesn't matter. And when you understand spirituality and you understand the deeper reasons for why things are the way they are, then you can truly see past the fear, the hatred, and the bigotry, and understand the grander design that holds all things together and that pushes us forward in the expansion of creation and in the experience of Source through us in form. So when I realized that I was gay, growing up a Catholic and understanding that by the words of those teaching me in the church and by those who loved me in family, they did not understand this. They only saw something to be feared, something to avoid, something to completely rally against. But I know myself and I know who I am. And I felt so shunned from my faith, from my Catholic faith, but I didn't feel shunned from God. And there was something that happened there. How could I feel shunned by my Catholic faith and not feel that shunning, not feel that same energy from the being that I believed to be God? So I started having conversations with God myself, and I started asking God, what is this? Why do I have these feelings, and why do I feel this way and think this way? What's wrong with me? Am I broken? And why would I go to hell? Why would I be damned for all eternity to this, place of like complete despair and anger and hatred and pain? And what I heard back and what I got back was that you are not broken. You are not broken. You simply are broken in the way you perceive me. And I was like, what? Like, what? Like, okay. So it's like, okay. So that really kind of shifted some things, because I know myself to not be this like evil person going out trying to hurt people or cause pain. If anything, I'm the opposite. I try to help people. I try to be there for people. So it didn't make sense to me why something that felt perfectly authentic to who I was as a person, as my being, was going against this. And what I was told is that we all have shoes that we walk in. And when it comes to our faith, there are just as many shoes to represent just as many faiths. And when we go through life, we wear a pair of shoes, and those shoes protect our feet. They protect us. They help us to get from one place to another. But without those shoes, we'd be completely naked. We'd be completely without protection, without covering. And so it causes us to have more fear, to have more vulnerability, to feel more vulnerable. And so we turn to our faith for comfort. We turn to our faith for clarity. We turn to our faith for awareness, for knowledge. We turn to our faith for connection with Source, with God. Now, I know from experience, as many of you do as well, that we do not always find God in our faith. We are told and we're conditioned that that's where God is, but that is not where God is. God is everywhere in all things. But we believe this because this is where, we are conditioned to believe that this is where we will find God. So we can only find God in a church or in a place that is designated as a place for God. So when I began to evolve in my own spirituality and I began to have more of an understanding, what I realized is that I'm not broken. And my understanding of God being this loving presence and awareness and consciousness is loving. There's nothing beyond that which is associated with this. And that went against my faith, because my faith teaches me that there is a God that is very human, that is focused on damning everybody, picking on people, oh, you're not doing what I want you to do, then I'm going to punish you. And it started to conflict in my mind because, knowing what I knew inside, I'm not an evil person. I'm not broken. What is this? And what's going on here? And, God is not this, bully that just picks and chooses based off of human traits and qualities. God does not experience anger. That's a human experience. God does not experience jealousy. That is a human experience. God does not experience possessiveness. That is a human experience. To God, there are no limitations. Just the idea, an idea in the mind of God immediately brings it into creation, because that is the power of God. Why would God create something and then desire for something to be different? That doesn't click. So for me, it was like, something's not right here. Something's not adding up. What I realized is that, my religion got it wrong. My Catholic faith got it wrong. Not everything, but they got a lot of things wrong, because the people who brought together the faith, and this is for every single religion in the world and in all of history, the people who came together to produce that faith were humans. They were humans who had motivations of their own. They had their own fears, their own worries. Yes, they had their own experiences, but they didn't just share their experience. They also shared their own beliefs, their own ideas. And that is what has created the bulk of all of the religious knowledge that we have. And religion is only the path to understanding God through a structure, through a form. And what God has told me through my own experiences is that, and through Aja, because for me, Aja is my bridge point between myself and Source, is that we all wear shoes, and at some point we outgrow the shoes that we are given. And we have to decide if we're going to continue to walk with those shoes, even if it becomes painful, even if it is restrictive, even if they fall apart and it's obvious that they no longer serve us. Some of us will hold to our religions and our faiths even when they no longer serve us, even when they restrict us, even when they no longer provide us a path to the destination, which is to Source, to true understanding of source and of God. And in understanding God authentically, there's a level of faith you have to have, a faith that cannot be taught in religion. It is a faith of connection, of understanding that you are a part of God, you are part of source, and that we're all a part of this. So trusting in having that faith and coming from a place of love, it basically forced me to have to confront the inevitable decision to leave my faith and to leave my Catholic upbringing. I still appreciate the practices. I still appreciate what I learned and what I was taught. And I have great respect for the faith. But I also understand that it's still a limited ability, a limited practice for understanding and communion with Source and with God. So once I began to open myself up to the potential of God, the real potential, the real ability to connect with Source, all of a sudden, all of these things began to happen, and all of this knowledge and wisdom just like started to come at me. And it's that saying, knocking you shall find, and seeking you shall find, knocking it shall be open to you. When you begin to ask the questions, when you begin to reach for your answers, reach for something that's purer than what we've been conditioned to believe, the answers show up. They may not all show up in a perfectly packaged book because, that's the easy way, right? That's the easy way to understand Source and God. But God is not a belief system. God is an experience. And this is what God is talking about here in this part of the book. Pay attention to your experience. Pay attention to your emotions. When someone is speaking and they say that they are speaking the words of God or the words of, Source, or they are representing the highest, grandest beingness that is, but their actions don't match up, their intent, what is intended behind that doesn't match up, when they come from a place of hatred or anger or fear, I know that that is not a true representation of Source. I know that it is a limited, very handicapped form of understanding what is authentically Source, what is the knowledge and wisdom that is within all of us. So when someone is speaking to me and they're saying one thing, and I use this for every person that I encounter, and I use this for, the people who are our leaders, I use this for the politicians out there, I use this for the spiritual leaders out there, etc. When they are speaking and the intent behind the words do not match up to the words and the actions do not match up to the words, I know that they're in conflict and they do not know of what they speak, and they do not have the spiritual wisdom to use the knowledge that they have gained. So there's a missing element there. There's a missing piece. There's a lack of ability to utilize the spiritual wisdoms that have been given to us through religious belief systems, through the different spiritual practices. So this is what God is saying here. This is what is being communicated to Neil. God is saying, I am not just the words that you read. I am not just the words that you hear. I am the experience that you have. I am the emotions that you have. I am in all of that. And you need to pay attention to all of it, because I've bestowed these opportunities to understand. I've bestowed all of this to you. Use it. And that is what we're being told through this part of it here. And I know this to be true from my own experience, because when I have listened and I have followed the path in the way that only true faith grants you, you do not encounter more hatred or anger or fear. In fact, you are liberated from it. You will still have human experiences. I still have very much human experiences. I'm sure y'all can go through my Instagram. Y'all can go through all of that, and you can see when I've been very human. But then at the same time, I know better. I do know better. And sometimes I know that I'm being very human in the way that I'm expressing and experiencing things. But I try and I focus on trying to also really focus more on embodying the value of spiritual knowledge that I've gained over the years, because I've experienced a lot of it and I know better, but I still sometimes struggle with my human side, and that's okay. That's what we're here for. We're here to have a human experience. We're not always supposed to be the grandest glorified version of ourselves. Sometimes we just need to be, the version of ourselves that operates at a lower frequency, to understand things, to gauge things, and it helps us and it gives us experiences and teaches us what works and what doesn't, how to be and how not to be. So that's what's being communicated right here in this part of the book. So let's going on to the next part of this. So the next question, because that was that part of it. So then Neil goes into this further. And he says, how can I know this communication is from God? How do I know this is not my own imagination? And God answers, what would be the difference? Do you not see that I could just as easily work through your imagination as anything else? I will bring you the exact right thoughts, words, or feelings at any given moment, suited precisely to the purpose at hand, using one device or several. You will know these words are from me because you, of your own accord, have never spoken so clearly. Had you already spoken so clearly on these questions, you would not be asking them. I could always tell that what I was reading or what I heard was authentic and true to the core of my soul, because the moment that I heard it, I could not dispute it. I could not fight against it. It was like, I know this. Like, it's almost as if something has been said that has already existed within me, but I finally have heard it in the form of words. That's what it is. And so when you have that, like, oh my God, like, aha moment, that is actually the acknowledgement within your being, within your soul, that what you have just heard is the physical manifestation of knowledge that you know at your deepest being. We just don't always consciously pay attention to it. So those aha moments and those moments of like, I know this, or this is true. Like, I don't know how I know, but I know this is true. Pay attention, because when you hear truth, you can't dispute it because it's built into the core of our soul. And we all know that this physical experience that we are having right now, this physical body, is just an illusion. And it's a tool that we are all using to experience things, to understand things that we desire, that we choose to experience, to have. So the question Neil asks is, to whom does God communicate? Are there special people? Are there special times? God's response is, all people are special, and all moments are golden. There is no person and there is no time. There is no person and there is no time one more special than another. Many people choose to believe that God communicates in special ways and only with special people. This removes the mass of the people from responsibility for hearing my message, much less receiving it, which is another matter, and allows them to take someone else's word for everything. You don't have to listen to me, for you've already decided that others have heard from me on every subject, and you have them to listen to. By listening to what other people think they heard me say, you don't have to think at all. This is the biggest reason for most people turning from my messages on a personal level. If you acknowledge that you are receiving my messages directly, then you are responsible for interpreting them. It is far safer and much easier to accept the interpretation of others, even others who have lived 2,000 years ago, than seek to interpret the messages you may very well be receiving in this moment now. Yet I invite you to a new form of communication with God, a two-way communication. In truth, it is you who have invited me, for I have come to you in this form right now in answer to your call. Neil asks, why do some people, take Christ for example, seem to hear more of your communication than others? The answer: because some people are willing to actually listen. They are willing to hear. They are willing to remain open to the communication, even when it seems scary or crazy or downright wrong. Neil asks, we should listen to God even when what's being said seems wrong? God says, especially when it seems wrong. If you think you are right about everything, who needs to talk to God? Go ahead and act on all that you know, but notice that you've all been doing that since time began. And look at what shape the world is in. Clearly, you've missed something. Obviously, there is something you don't understand. That which you do understand must seem right to you, because right is a term you use to designate something with which you agree. What you've missed will therefore appear at first to be wrong. The only way to move forward on this is to ask yourself, what would happen if everything I thought was wrong was actually right? Every great scientist knows about this. When what a scientist does is not working, a scientist sets aside all of the assumptions and starts over. All great discoveries have been made from a willingness and ability to not be right. And that's what's needed here. You cannot know God until you stop telling yourself that you already know God. You cannot hear God until you stop thinking that you've already heard God. I cannot tell you my truth until you stop telling me yours. So Neil asks, but my truth about God comes from you. God answers, who said so? Neil, others. God, what others? Neil, leaders, ministers, rabbis, priests, books, the Bible, for heaven's sake. God, those are not authoritative sources. Neil, they aren't? God, no. Neil, then what is? God, listen to your feelings. Listen to your highest thoughts. Listen to your experience. Whenever any of these differ from what you've been told by your teachers or read in your books, forget the words. Words are the least reliable purveyor of truth. Neil, there is so much I want to say to you, so much I want to ask. I don't know where to begin. For instance, why is it that you do not reveal yourself? If there really is a God and you are it, why do you not reveal yourself in a way we can all understand? God, I have done so over and over. I am doing so again right now. God, no, I mean by a method of revelation that is uncontrovertible, that cannot be denied. God, such as? Neil, such as appearing right now before my eyes. God, I am doing so right now. Neil, where? God, everywhere you look. Neil, no, I mean in an incontrovertible way, in a way no man can deny. God, what way would that be? In what form or shape would you have me appear? Neil, in the form or shape that you actually have. God, that would be impossible, for I have no shape or form you understand. I could adopt a form or shape that you could understand, but then everyone would assume that what they have seen is the one and only form and shape of God, rather than a form or shape of God, one of many. People believe I am what they see me as, rather than what they do not see. But I am the great unseen, not what I cause myself to be in any particular moment. In a sense, I am what I am not. It is from the am notness that I come, and to it I always return. Yet when I come in one particular form or another, a form in which I think people can understand me, people assign me that form forevermore. And should I come in any other form to any other people, the first say I did not appear to the second, because I did not look to the second as I did to the first, nor say the same things. So how could it have been me? You see, then it matters not in what form or in what manner I reveal myself. Whatever manner I choose and whatever form I take, none will be incontrovertible. Neil, but if you did something that would evidence the truth of who you are beyond doubt or question, God intervenes. God intercedes. There are still those who would say it is of the devil, or simply someone's imagination, or any cause other than me. If I revealed myself as God Almighty, King of heaven and earth, and moved mountains to prove it, there are those who would say it must have been Satan. And such is as it should be, for God does not reveal God's self to God's self from or through outward observation, but through inward experience. And when inward experience has revealed God's self, outward observation is not necessary. And if outward observation is necessary, inward experience is not possible. If then revelation is requested, it cannot be had, for the act of asking is a statement that is not there, that nothing of God is now being revealed. Such a statement produces the experience, for your thought about something is creative, and your word is productive, and your thought and your word together are magnificently effective in giving birth to your reality. Therefore, shall you experience that God is not now revealed. For if God were, you would not ask God to be. And I'll leave it there because that's quite a bit to digest there. So that is something that I've had to deal with a lot. People telling me that what I am the devil. I am the living incarnate devil here. Some people think of me as a saint. Some people see me as devil incarnate. It doesn't matter to me what anyone thinks because I'm neither. I'm both. I'm neither and I'm both. Because God is a reflection of all that is possessed within creation. And the illusion of darkness, the illusion of fear, the illusion of what God isn't is also a product of God. It is actually a gift of God. It is why we have lives here in the physical world, because in order for us to know ourselves as source in form, as me, I have to experience myself as I am not, so that I can know myself as I am. And I am only knowing myself as a fraction of what is the divine, of what is God, of what is source. But I am still the eyes and ears and heart and hands of God here, as you are. We are all source in experiential form. So as I moved forward in my spiritual progression, and I began to ask questions, and I began to receive my answers through my thoughts, my emotions, and the activation of my memories, which is exactly what God says God comes through. That information. And you see me do that on the lives. You see me do that when I'm communicating with the Spirit. You see me do that when I'm channeling Aja. You see me do that when I'm answering questions about someone's future or about someone's situation. I am in communion with Source, and I know myself to be Source, as we all are. And so I don't question whether the answer will come. I only question how I will interpret and understand the answer, because I will always get the answer. It's the understanding of the answer. That's the hard part. That's the challenge. That is the thing that shies us away from trying to understand and have that direct communion with Source, with God, because we don't always trust ourselves and our understanding of things. And that makes sense, because we're still human. We're still very limited beings in our perspective. But because I've given myself permission to have a closer relationship with Source, with God, I receive more from Source and from God, not because I'm special, but because I've simply acknowledged my divinity. And the moment that we all acknowledge that you acknowledge that, then you can have the same abilities, the same capabilities, the same clarity of thought, of emotion, of knowledge, and of experience that I am able to have many times in my life, more so now than I ever did when I was like going to church every Sunday and, drinking the blood of Christ and eating the body of Christ. I mean, that didn't really serve any purpose for me. Only it was a tradition, but it did nothing for my connection with Source, with God. And we are all still people. We are all still fractions of the grander being. So I shouldn't just trust one man. None of us should trust just one man, because that is an offense to the wisdom that has been made available to us. That is an offense to the gifts of awareness and of beingness that we have here. So it's important that we choose a personal relationship with Source, with God, not the God of the Bible, not the God of all of these religious beliefs and all of these personal beliefs, because we all have our own gods, whether you realize it or not. The God that I built in my head by going to church is different from the God my mother built in her head, and the God of other. Even though we all went to the same church, we all went to the same sessions, doesn't matter, because everybody formed their own illusion of what God is. But when you begin to question that and begin to ask God to show itself, themselves, ourselves to ourselves, the answers come, the clarity comes. And then you realize how stupid I was to think that was just God, because that's like going to the Costco or the Sam's and like the lady who's got the samples and she's like, here, have a sampler, have a sampler. Oh my God, I'm so hungry. You have fed me. You have given me sustenance, but it's only a sample. And we're like building an entire belief system on that sample. And we've had that belief system in the form of a book called the Bible for 1,600 years, around there. So that is not God. That is a sample. And we're basically obsessed with samples of divine experiences, but we're not actually obsessed with trying to go past that, trying to ask God to show me more, give me more, allow me to experience more. But the moment you ask that, you will get it, and it will come through your experiences. It doesn't have to be in the beginning of my own development, I was like, y'all need to show yourselves to me. I used to tell spirits that. Show yourselves to me. I want to see you. I want absolute proof you exist. I want to see an angel with the whole wing bit. I want to see all of that stuff. And I kept telling them, show yourselves to me, show yourselves to me. I never saw a physical operation of any of that stuff. I mean, I've had some experiences, but it wasn't like they just hey, I'm here. You see me? Okay, I'm real. They didn't do that. What they did was they showed up, but not in the way that I expected. They showed up in here. And when they showed up in here and in here, I was aware that something was happening, but I didn't understand that this, what was going on inside here, was actually God showing itself to me. And so it wasn't until I looked at myself in the mirror and saw, oh my God, I get it now. I understand. I know what I'm seeing now. I'm seeing myself. I'm seeing God. I'm seeing all of us. I'm seeing God in all things, because God is in all things. So when you realize that it's an internal experience, it's not an external experience. How easy would it be for us if God just suddenly landed, hey everybody, here I am the great divine, I am the source of all things. We can't even get people to believe in vaccines. We can't even get people to believe in COVID. We can't even get people to believe that psychic ability is real and that we all have it. We can't even get people to believe that, you have all of these people who believe that there's life after death, but say you've spoken to a spirit or you've had an experience, no, that's not real, or that's the devil. How is that logically? That doesn't make logical sense, y'all. So it's the same thing. You have to trust your internal processes. We've all been given this thing inside of us. You can call it your human heart. I call it the root of our consciousness, the root of our soul. We've all been given this. It all exists in all of us. And it tells us what is authentic and what isn't. It gives us clarity. And if we wonder and question that, all we need to do is ask for the validity to come, or for us to be shown something that will help us to know that this is real or this is true. And the many miracles will start to happen. The synchronicities start to happen. The repeating numbers start to happen. The things that I see sometimes out of the corner of my eyes, or the little sparklies in the air, they start to show up. The things start to show up, but it's not going to come the way that you expect. And so for those of us who are wanting to see our loved ones in spirit, show yourselves. They got to show yourself to me. If you love me, Dad, you should show yourself to me in physical form. Why would you only take that as valid evidence that there is life after death, when we can't even see heaven here? We can experience heaven here, but we can't see it here. Why would we want them to try to come down a bunch of notches, come down a bunch of levels to show up in physical form here? Because we need that validation, because we don't believe. That's kind of an injustice. So instead, we should just be open to however they communicate, because in that has allowed me to be able to communicate with them just as much as it would allow you to communicate with them as well. And this is what I tell people. I'm not that special, y'all. Just because I can speak to spirits, just because I've seen some things, just because I've experienced some things, I can channel my soul. I can, see the future. I can, discern stuff that isn't physically in front of me. Just because I have these abilities doesn't mean that it is just for me. This is something we all possess. The only difference is that I believe and I know that I can do it, as I believe that we all can do it. And I give myself permission to do it, and to understand it, and to pay attention to what's going on in my head and what's going on in my emotions, my hearts, my memories. And there's the communication. And I prove it to myself every single time I get on a live, every single time I do a session. So, all right, guys. So let's see. What questions do y'all have here about this? Let me see if I can go through some of these real quick. Because I want to see if there's some spiritual based questions that y'all have. Barbie. Barbie's like, oh my gosh, I refer to my Catholic faith as that favorite pair of jeans that no longer fit, but you love and have so many memories and wonderful times, but they are out of style for you now. Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. Yeah, I always say it's a pair of shoes that we outgrew, but we still, some people are just so afraid of buying a new pair of shoes that they're just so used to what they're comfortable with or what they're familiar with. They're not willing to risk a new pair of shoes. That's what, religion has become for people. It's become something that holds them back. Lali Lola, it's what my grandmother left to me, but I understand everything that you say, but kept my Catholic religion. There's nothing wrong. And here, let me say this very clearly. There is nothing wrong with being Catholic or with having Catholic faith. If the pair of shoes work for you, use it. Use it. What I believe is like, I've got a few pair of shoes. Some of them are for hiking. Some of them are for, going jogging, whatever. You can have several pair of shoes. You don't have to go by just one pair of shoes. Your Catholic faith doesn't have to limit you. Use it as a bouncing off point to expand your wisdom and your knowledge. Don't limit yourself to only that. So I still celebrate Christmas. I still celebrate some of the traditions that I learned from my Catholic faith. That doesn't mean that I embody the Catholic faith and that's what I base everything that I do around. It's just something that I have appreciation for. Eliana, it's like, you're special. Oh, thank you. I'm just another person. I'm just you. I'm just you. That's all I am. I'm just you. This is Conversations with God by Neale Donald Walsh. There are other books with the same title, but Neale Donald Walsh, Conversations with God. There's a movie out by him, and it talks about what he actually went through before he wrote this book. So the movie's more about his experience getting to writing this book, but it's not actually about it's not the book. You have to read the book. And the audiobook, I love the audiobook because in the audiobook what they do is Neil is his own voice, and then they get two people to speak as God, an old man and a woman who's like maybe like in her 30s or something. So it's almost like God is speaking through the different voices of us, and he's having that conversation with it. So I like the audiobook version of this. But Conversations with God by Neale Donald Walsh. And people don't know that, this man, I believe he was a radio personality. And then he had a car accident which broke his neck. And after that, he lost his job. He wasn't able to work. He lost his home. His wife and children moved away. They left him because he wasn't able to work, and they just kind of like went on and just dropped it. Not only that, but it's not like he was a complete victim. I mean, he wasn't like the nicest person, and he struggled. And he sometimes had issues with with being like one of those guys who was like, they good old boys, kind of like a good old boy sometimes. So he struggled with that. And interestingly enough, after he lost everything and he became homeless, he was living in Houston, actually. He lived homeless in Houston and even in the Dallas area. So he lived in that area for a good while, for a couple of years, I believe, until he was finally able to climb out of being homeless. And when I say homeless, I mean literally mean homeless. He was sleeping in tents with the groups of people who were homeless under the bridges. He was digging in trash cans for his food. Like, he was literally homeless, guys. So he definitely went through it and back. He managed to get a job through a bunch of little mini miracles or synchronicities, which we watched the movie. It's interesting to see what happened. But he got back on track. He got a job. He was able to finally get a job, climb out of being homeless, and he was able to finally pay bills. But he wasn't happy. He wasn't any happier. He actually felt like he was happier sometimes when he was homeless and when he had a home and he had food and he was able to work. So he got so angry. He's like, what the hell? Like, I'm trying to make my life work for me and it just isn't working. What am I doing wrong? And so he just got really frustrated and angry, and this is why he wrote the book. But that's interesting because it's essentially what happened with me. I got to a place in my life where I refused to accept what I was told, which was that I am wrong, I'm broken, that I'm evil, and that I'm bad. I refused to accept that. So I said, nope, I'm not going to accept that. I'm not going to accept that the God of love and of light is going to damn me because of something that I haven't even been able, that I was born with and that I can't control. Like, that's ridiculous. And so I went against it, and that's why I was able to find myself, and I was able to find my true understanding, my truest understanding of God beyond what has been written and what has been shared in books. Audible 80s, like, how were you able to start deciphering the messages you were receiving? I started off with being a crazy meditator, believe it or not. Like, I used to meditate for hours a day. I mean, I'm serious. Like, I used to meditate for 4 to 6 hours a day, especially when I didn't have school and I was doing, when I was in during the summertime when we were on summer break during high school, I used to meditate for hours a day. And I used to listen to music like this and just sit in meditation. And I meditated and meditated and meditated and meditated, waiting for God to show up, or waiting for something to happen, or waiting for like something miraculous to occur. What meditation did was it just made me more sensitive. And it made me more sensitive that I was really sensitive to energy, to people, to intent, to emotions, to my own thoughts. I was more sensitive because when you stop paying attention to the monkey mind and you start paying attention to nothing, then anything is just going to stand out more to you. So when you meditate on nothing, then after you're done meditating, you're more sensitive to things. And then you get back to what's normal for you, but you kind of have to come out of it. So that made me more sensitive to my emotions, to my thoughts, to what I was feeling and what I was experiencing. Over time, though, as I began to develop myself as a psychic and a medium, what I realized and what people use, what I was doing that I thought I was doing I was trying to increase my psychic ability and my mediumship ability. And I was meditating and I would just shut my mind off again. And that actually was the opposite of what I should have been doing to develop it. Because it's one thing, meditation and shutting things down can help you to be sensitive and to be aware. But you still have to receive information. You still have to understand the information. The only way you can do that is not by shutting everything down, but by being more aware of what is happening in your brain, what is happening in your being. So I began to pay more attention to my thoughts, my emotions, and my memories, because they were it's like the stock exchange. There's always stuff going through our heads, going through our minds. So we're always thinking that, when we wake up, we think about one thing that leads to another thing that leads to another thing. This is how thoughts work. One thought leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. There's a chain of thoughts that are connected to each other, and there's usually one thought that leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. When you pay attention to your thoughts and to your emotions, you'll notice little subtle changes or variations there, where one thought leads to another, and then all of a sudden something feels very disconnected or disjointed, and it feels like the thought's like very different from the others and doesn't have anything that lines up with it. That is intuition. That is psychic ability. That is what helps me to understand when I'm receiving communication from spirit. And so when I start paying attention to my thoughts, they start to get very random. And so now when I just say, okay, I'm going to do this now, just by the intent that I'm doing this, all of a sudden I've given myself permission. All my thoughts become random. All my thoughts become disjointed. Everything is disconnected, doesn't really link up to each other. That's the first stage of figuring things out. The second stage of it is understanding the meaning behind it and interpreting the symbolism, interpreting the emotions, making sense of that. That's why I teach people one-on-one, and I do all of the mentorship classes that I do with people and one-on-one training with people, because that's the hard part. That's the part that took me years to figure out and to understand. And I'm still to this day learning to do it better every single time I do it. But that's the part that people get hung up on, because they don't realize everything that we're thinking and that we're feeling. There's a lot of information there, but we try to push it away. Or psychics out there tell people, you have to meditate on nothing, and turn off your brain. You don't turn off your brain. You use what's there, because that is the communication there. Three weeks she sleeps. I'm trying really hard to utilize my gifts, but sometimes have a tough time deciphering true messages from, am I just over imagining things? So I'm trying to let go of how I expect it to appear. That's good. Drop the expectations, because expectations will hold you back. But another thing that you can do is give yourself permission to be wrong. Because the minute that I gave myself permission to be wrong, I was wrong. But I also started to get right a lot more often. And you have to be willing to make a fool out of yourself and to look like you're a complete fraud. You have to be willing to look that way so that you can give yourself permission to be wrong, because people are going to use it against you. People will use anything and everything you put out as a weapon against you if they have an intent that is based in fear and hatred and a lack of connection. And that is where that person is coming from. So that's what that's about. And so you have to give yourself permission to be wrong. But if you give yourself an outlet, if you practice paying attention on a consistent basis, and just maybe even writing or journaling what's going on in your head in that moment, just write it one thought to the next, to the next, to the next, try to do it. It takes a lot of effort to pay attention, but once you start doing it, you get the hang of it, and then all of a sudden you start to differentiate subtle differences and variations between one piece of information or thought versus another. They're so subtle, you cannot tell the difference between one or another unless you actually pay attention on a regular basis. And it's the practice that does that, which is why I tell people, you can wait for like some magical switch to turn on and get struck by lightning or have an accident for you to be psychic, or you can just start paying attention to your thoughts, your emotions, and your memories, and then start paying attention to the subtle variations between them, and then start to distinguish between something versus another. Lizzie was, I went through a lot of pair of shoes, but learned a lot, and a lot through you, my love. Thank you, Lizzie. I appreciate that. I struggle with religion. I think I'm comfortable now. This study group is going to be interesting. I love this book, and I love the study group. And I think that, the reason why I do this is because I want people to actually do the work. I can be up here and say, oh, I'm a spiritual teacher, y'all. Listen to me, do what I say. I don't want you to do what I say, to listen to me. I want you to hear what I have to say. And then I want you to go out into the world, give it a shot or try something, and then let life validate it, whether it's true or whether it's not going to work for you. But I'm only sharing what has worked for me, what I've experienced, and what I know to be true. And I know from experience with people that this has been true for many people as well. And others have been able to gain through that process, the exemplified process as well. Maria Luciano 504, can anyone who meditates often open themselves up to being psychic? Yeah, you don't have to. I don't meditate as often as I used to. Now I only meditate if I need to start lining up with a higher frequency or vibration, because my energy is off, which I'm pretty good at managing my energy, and I'm pretty good at like switching my mind into psychic mode. So I don't really meditate. For me, and you don't have to meditate this traditional way now. Like for me, going for a walk and just being aware and just paying attention of the beauty, here in the mountains, here in Santa Fe, that's meditation for me. Here talking to you, hearing the sound of this music, having the candles on in the background, which they're lit back there. That for me is meditation. So reading this book and getting into the energy of what is being channeled, that is meditation for me. So for me, meditation comes in different forms. It's not just sitting there cross-legged, in a state of silence. That can serve a purpose, that can help you, but this isn't the only way to meditate. Awesome. All right, let me go over here to see what questions are over here. Let's see. Lola, the name of the book is Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. Christine, y'all do know he's not doing readings right now. Thank you, Christine. That's funny. Yeah, I need to do something. What I was going to do is I want to get like a board or something and put it there and like have it says no readings, study group, conversations with God. So people can see it like right over here on the screen right here, and they'll know. But people aren't going to pay attention to that. They're going to immediately start like throwing out all their questions about the readings and stuff. Let's see. Sarah Woods, the first part of the book is so powerful. I can't be the only one who could feel the authenticity of God as source when reading it. I love that you're doing study group on this book. I love this book. Like I've had so many versions, like I've had so many of these copies because it's 3 books, but I wanted the like full, like this is the full version. This has the 3 books in one. And told my sister, I want the full book because I'm sick of having the 3 separate books. And I have a bad habit where when I get something like a book and I know it's like it's completely life-changing, I tend to give the book away to the person who I think needs it, and so then I end up with no book and have to go buy a new one. So that tends to be my issue. Sarah's like, it's because it is it is catered to our ego selves, small and simple. Yeah, exactly. I think that's, part of the problem with books like the Bible, where you have to remember that the Bible is not like something that was produced all together at once. The Bible is broken up into many different sections, and it's not even complete. It's a bunch of pieces of texts that are based in beliefs before there was even the writing of those things down. The earliest text that was written down that we know of that even has any connection to biblical knowledge, which is actually was never even included in the Bible, were the Gnostic Gospels. And those are about 50, I think it's like 50 to 80 years out from when Christ supposedly existed. And so those are the earliest texts, carbon dated earliest text. The earliest Bible, complete Bible, wasn't until I think 400 or 500 years after Christ existed. So there's a lot of texts that are earlier than the biblical completed book. A lot of people don't know that. And a lot of people don't realize that, the Bible didn't just fall out of the sky. Like, it's not like this book has said, Moses didn't walk down from the mountain, y'all, with the Bible in his hands. This is not how that came into being. People believe that. I used to have a friend, and she was like, I asked her, I said, do you know where the Bible came from? Like, how was it created? And she's like, from God. And I was like, no. I'm like, if you're going to spend this much time obsessing about what's in it, maybe you should also obsess about where it came from and how it came into being. And it depends on which Bible you're talking about, because there are all these versions and all these changes that have been made depending on the group that took the material and said, we're going to change this because we think we can do a better job of giving you a more clear understanding of the Word of God. And so then you have a different version, and there are all these versions out there now. But the biblical texts they're combined form of texts. They took a lot of old traditional Judaic material that existed before Christ, and they brought it in and said, okay, here you go, first, Old Testament. And the versions, the material that they got, that they used for the Old Testament, is actually it's a changed version of the Judaic material of the old text. So the texts that they used were already changed. So they didn't even use the original versions of those texts. They just took what was available and they incorporated it into the Bible, which is the Old Testament. Then they, and the original texts were actually in a form of, it's a different language now, but it's in a form of Greek, not modern day Greek, but in old ancient Greek. So the old text, the old material was in ancient Greek. And then at some point there was an invasion in that area, in those regions, of the, I think it was the, what do they call it? Syrians. I think it's the Syrians, or it's a group that is associated. But they invaded. And they pretty much did what most invaders do. They essentially got rid of all of the material, and the material that was left that they wanted to use to their advantage, they basically twisted around and they added in their own representatives in their own belief system. And so the Old Testament is actually kind of a restructured version of these old texts using these Ezrian representatives. And they were obsessed with kings and power and control. Before them, the texts actually don't even really speak about these kings, and they don't speak about things in this way. They don't even speak about God as like the king. That didn't come into effect until the Assyrians took over that land and twisted things around. Then, Christ came into the picture, and he was aware of all of those things because he had studied and did his homework. And he was like, this ain't right. Y'all believing in this, I get it, but this isn't helping y'all to have a closer bond with God. This isn't helping y'all. And so, he tried to figure some things out for himself. He was a loudmouth. People hated him because he was constantly creating trouble in his area. And so he was like, I need to understand more, and there's only so much I can get from the teachings that I was brought up in. So he took off and he left. He left for what, 10, 15 years? I mean, he was like from 13 all the way to like his 30s. So he left for a while, and he traveled in places like India, and there are stories of him in those areas and territories studying with the Buddhists, studying with these different beliefs and organizations and so forth. And he learned a lot. And so when he came back with a very different mindset that he gained from all of his travels and his studies. And so people didn't really understand that as well, because that was foreign to them. His ideas, his concepts were foreign to them. You know, they were raised in like the Old Testament material. So he came in with a bunch of like really shocking ideas about love and compassion, and you can call it socialism. You know, everyone should have these things. Everyone's entitled to this and that. So he came in with all of these ideas, and they were just like, you know, like what we got issues with you. We got issues with you. This is not. But people like ate it up. They like sopped it up. Like, oh my God, like how did I not know this? Because they felt the ringing of truth inside them. That's why. And so that's how he built up his ministry. So. And then, of course, you know, fast forward, you know, nothing that he said was ever written down until like 60 years later. And the people who wrote it down were the Gnostics. And there were some other people. I think Thomas was someone else. I think it was his brother. But they wrote it down. They got it down on paper. And because before that, it was oral tradition. They just passed it on through verbiage. So fast forward, and 400 years later, you know, you've got a bunch of different churches that are trying to be in power and control, trying to like have their say. And there was too many of them, and it was starting to grow. It was starting to expand beyond the belief system that was the dominant religion of that time. And so Emperor Constantine was like, we got to figure this out, because this is going to create a lot of craziness here. And so he brought a bunch of these church leaders together and said, y'all figure out what we need to do, because we need one source for everyone so that everybody can go off of this basic source. So he started that process because it needed to happen at that point. There was just too many people who had too many opinions, and people were, you know, arguing with everybody. The Gnostics were a part of some of the initial get-togethers or meetings at the Council of Nicaea, but their beliefs, their stories of Christ had nothing to do with the birth or even the death of Christ. They only spoke and wrote down what he said. There was nothing about being born, you know, with a star about him. There was nothing about that. There was nothing about the way he died. There was just what he said. And that's which is the Gnostic Gospels. But that's all that they shared. That's all that they wrote. That's all that they hid away in all these caves in clay jars. What he said. That's it. Just what he said. And because when they brought some of that text and that information to these meetings, all the other church leaders were like, no, like y'all don't know that's wrong, or that's blasphemous, or that goes against this, and and they were trying to carve out the story of Christ. So it just got really diluted, and they were basically banned from being a part of the coming together and bringing the Bible together. So that's what that was about. So what as the Bible is a book. The oldest copy is in the Vatican, but it's still like 400 years after the I think it's 400 years after. And back then, most people were illiterate. They didn't know how to read. So there was no point in having mass-produced books because people didn't read. Only the church leaders knew how to read. They were literate. And so they would tell people what the book said. And then, of course, and there were only so many copies of this. And then it went on and went on. Of course, after a while, you have all these interpretations and people thinking that they know better. And then they created their own versions. And then that's why we have all these different versions, King David, all this. So that's what that's about. Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you. I appreciate that. My favorite music for meditation is the one that I'm listening to right now, which is the Tunnel Singer. Tunnel Singer by Ellen Schumacher, or Shoemaker. And you can find her on like Apple Music and stuff like that. But there's one called OBG Way. It's called OBG Way. And I love it. It sounds like a siren's call. So I love the sound of it because it helps me to get into that deeper state. And also Native American flute music. I love Native American flute music. All right, guys. I love you all. So I think that's it. That's it. So I love you all. And that's it for our study group today. So I will be back, tomorrow I'm not doing my podcast. I'm done with podcasts for the rest of this year, and then I won't start up till next year. But next Wednesday we have our next study group. It's going to be the Course in Miracles. So, and it's just going to be me because Michelle's taking a little bit of a break for a while. So it's just going to be me with the Course in Miracles. And then on next Friday, we'll be doing the study group again. So, all right, guys, I love you all. And I